The amazing thing about blockchain is it operates as a distributed computer, meaning it can do all the things that a traditional computer can do. So, as I said in my opening statement, right now there are about 5 companies that really control the internet as we think of it, and they have their own servers, and our information is in those servers. Well, the great thing about blockchain is it distributes that power across the network. So you can think of the entire network as the computer that is doing the transactions. And in that circumstance, individuals own their own data. They control their own data, and they choose if they want to sell it to someone, if they want to pass it on to someone. All of that is under the control of the consumer, and no one else can monetize their data. So in many ways, that innovation, turning distributed computers into a giant server, is one of the most radical and potentially transformative innovations in our lifetime.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 264th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, thanks for checking it out. This is a podcast that is created by a regular taxpayer just like you who wanted to know what Congress was doing with my money and in my name. And I kind of got into all of this because I was watching a lot of C-SPAN and I found hearings to be fascinating. And then that got me into also looking at what was going on in the House and Senate floor. And I saw crazy things being slipped into bills and laws. And here we are about 12 years after I started watching C-SPAN obsessively. And now I have this podcast where I tell you what's in bills and laws and I highlight hearings for you. And this episode is of the highlighting hearings genre of Congressional Dish, because in the past few weeks, months actually, a big story here in the United States, possibly the world, probably the world, was the downfall and bankruptcy of a cryptocurrency exchange called FTX. And I was working on an episode because there has been a few hearings about the FTX bankruptcy. And so I was working on an episode on that. But I just found that my kind of intro to that episode, which was a, what is cryptocurrency segment, turned into a whole episode on its own. And I just kind of looked at the whole thing and realized that I have 2 episodes here, that might be shared for completely different reasons. Some people might want to know about the drama of the FTX debacle and the scam that whole thing was. But then some people might also be interested in just what is cryptocurrency? What is the blockchain? How does all of this work? And how is Congress looking to regulate this relatively new industry? So I decided to make this its own episode so that if you are interested in just what is cryptocurrency, or if you have someone in your life who is curious and you want to give them a good summary, I think this episode could be that. So that is what this episode is. It's kind of part 1 of 2. But for those of you who want information but can't stand me, you're going to love this episode, because it became very clear to me that I am just simply too dumb to explain any of this to you. So we're going to leave it up almost entirely to the experts. And I do have to give you some credit though, because you are the only reason why I knew enough to even put this episode together. When it comes to my experience with cryptocurrency, long time listeners know that I was really hesitant to even pay attention to this at all. Back when I started taking donations for this listener-supported podcast, there were people that wanted to donate to me anonymously. You didn't want me to know your name or to be associated with this podcast, because there are quite a few people that have reached out to me expressing their concerns that because I am such an antagonist to both parties and to some very powerful people in the world, there are those that are afraid that I am going to get assassinated and you didn't want to be brought down with me, which I can't blame you for that. And so people asked me to set up a Bitcoin wallet and then an Ethereum wallet and then a Litecoin wallet. And I just said, okay, if you want to give me this funny money, I don't know what I'm ever going to do with it, but you can give it to me. I'll hold on to it and just go along for the ride. And that's really all I've done. What's cool about this is that I started taking cryptocurrencies in 2013, I believe. And so I have a nice little nest egg of cryptocurrency donations that back then were like $50, $100, like in fiat currency. But Bitcoin is worth far more now than it was then, even with this recent cryptocurrency crash. So just by you giving me these cryptocurrency donations, I'm in the ecosystem. And because I do have, as they say, skin in the game, I have been paying attention to cryptocurrencies. And so I do have this knowledge base that I just don't think that I would have if you guys didn't drag me into it. So thank you to all of the crypto donors to Congressional Dish, because you have helped me create this episode in more ways than one. And what I really found with these hearings I'm going to share with you today is that they have helped me learn better about what cryptocurrencies are and what they aren't, and how this whole ecosystem works more than anything else I've tried. I've tried reading about it. I've tried talking to experts, and, no offense to all of my, my bros who have tried to get all of this information through my thick skull. But these hearings and these particular experts are the people that I think for the first time for me really got through to me. And now I feel like I have a really strong understanding, and I am excited to share this information with you today because, like Howard Mortman, who's the communications director at C-SPAN, he came on this show recently and he said one of the best things about having cameras inside of Congress is being able to learn from expert witnesses inside of the hearings. And so that's what you get to do today. You're going to hear experts who testified in 3 different hearings. These hearings took place in the Senate Banking Committee. That's where 2 of them were. And then there was 1 hearing in the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. But these hearings took place over the course of about 3 years. The first one took place in 2018. There was one in 2019. And then there was one in January of 2022 this year. And so what I did is I just created a mashup of the most interesting parts of those hearings. So I took the testimony and edited it together kind of by subject. And so you should know that these clips that you're going to hear today are highly edited. We're going to jump around between hearings, and I've moved testimony around. If you want to know what these conversations looked like in context, you can also go to the show notes for this episode in congressionaldish.com, where I give you all of my sources so that you can watch these hearings in full and, see what these people said in the order that they said it. I don't have timestamps for this one because that kind of documentation with the kind of work that I was doing, it would just be impossible. But yeah, the hearings are there for you. And all of these hearings were on C-SPAN, so they do have a transcript function there. So you can just look at a few words and find that clip in the transcript, and you should be able to find that part of the hearing pretty easily if you use the amazing tools that C-SPAN has given us. But if you listen to this episode and you end up getting in a crypto conversation at your holiday dinner with your tech bro cousin and actually feel like you know what you're talking about, I would like you to please consider paying for this episode of Congressional Dish. Because not only am I saving you from having to watch about 8 hours of hearings, complete with about 6 hours of rambling members of Congress, most of which I have cut for you in order to get this information, not only am I saving you all that time, but I'm also giving you my sources so that you don't have to trust me and you can verify what I say, or in this case, watch the hearings in context so you can judge for yourself if I edit fairly. But I'm also, most importantly, by refusing all advertiser payments, I'm giving you an episode that you can listen to outside in the winter that doesn't require you to take off your mittens multiple times on a freezing ass cold day to bang on the fast forward button to skip over the parts of the episode that suck. You can turn on this episode, keep your hands in your nice warm pockets or on your steering wheel without having to make the Sophie's choice of having to stop what you're doing, get cold hands, or crash your damn car, or listen to yet another person lie about how much they love the taste of athletic greens. You don't have to make that choice. every bit of this episode is going to be the good stuff. And so if you appreciate being able to listen to a podcast episode that stays on topic the entire time, please pay for Congressional Dish in whatever amount you consider fair for the value you receive. And to me, that's any amount above zero. But speaking of staying on topic, let's get to the topic, which is cryptocurrencies and blockchain. Now, we're going to start this montage off with Dr. Rebecca Nelson. She is a specialist in international trade and finance at the Congressional Research Service. And the Congressional Research Service is the nonpartisan group of people that Congress leans on to give them background information, not only for hearings, but for legislation that they're working on, just about any topic that they want information about. These are the experts that prepare reports for them and give them background information so that they can make our laws for us. But after Rebecca Nelson, we're also going to hear from a few experts who will introduce themselves. And then the clip will end with Jeremy Allaire, who is the co-founder and chairman and CEO of Circle. And he was testifying on behalf of the Blockchain Association. But here they are with an introduction into cryptocurrencies and blockchain.
In 2009, Bitcoin was launched as the first cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies are digital representations of value. They are generally administered using distributed ledger technology and have no status as legal tender. Today, more than 2,200 cryptocurrencies are in circulation. In terms of market size, however, cryptocurrencies are a small niche market.
My name is Peter Van Valkenburg, and I'm the Director of Research at Coin Center, an independent nonprofit focused on the public policy issues affecting cryptocurrency and public blockchain networks. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the world's first cryptocurrency, and it works because of the world's first public blockchain network. What does Bitcoin do? It's simple. It lets you send and receive value to and from anyone in the world using nothing more than a computer and an internet connection. Now, why is it revolutionary? Because unlike every other tool for sending money over the internet, it works without the need to trust a middleman. The lack of any corporation in between means that Bitcoin is the world's first public digital payments infrastructure. And by public, I simply mean available to all and not owned by any single entity. Now, we have public infrastructure for information, for websites, for email. It's called the internet. But the only public payments infrastructure that we have is cash, as in paper money. And it only works in face-to-face transactions. Before Bitcoin, if you wanted to pay someone remotely over the phone or the internet, then you could not use public infrastructure. You would rely on a private bank to open their books and add a ledger entry that debits you and credits the person you're paying. And if you both don't use the same bank, well, then there'll be multiple banks and multiple ledger entries in between. With Bitcoin, the ledger is the public blockchain, and anyone can add an entry to that ledger, transferring their Bitcoins to someone else. And anyone, regardless of their nationality, race, religion, gender, sex, or creditworthiness, can for absolutely no cost create a Bitcoin address in order to receive payments digitally. Bitcoin is the world's first globally accessible public money. So the profile of your average investor is technologically sophisticated because you have to deal with things like private and public keys, or at least understand how the company that you're working with is securing them if it's Coinbase or some other exchange. And it's usually younger people who are interested in these new alternatives, perhaps because they feel like the legacy financial system has in some ways disappointed them and they're looking for alternatives, I think in good faith. Corporate intermediaries providing today's critical but privately owned infrastructure are becoming fewer, larger, and more powerful, and their failures are increasingly grave. So roughly half of all Americans, 143 million people, had their Social Security numbers exposed to hackers because of a breach at Equifax. The SWIFT network has relayed hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions because of hacked member banks in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Ecuador, and Russia. The FBI suspects now that the largest of these hacks was perpetrated by North Korea. Corrupt, low-level employees at an Indian bank, Punjab National, were able to fraudulently certify SWIFT messages, stealing $1.8 billion. It's the largest electronic bank robbery in history. In fact, it's the largest bank robbery in history. Those vulnerabilities are inescapable in systems that have single points of failure. It doesn't matter if the point of failure is a corporation or if it's a government. There shouldn't be a single point of failure. The internet removed single points of failure in communications infrastructure and ushered in a wave of competition among new media corporations building on top of its public rails. Blockchains can similarly disintermediate critical payments and IoT infrastructure. The technology is not yet ready to answer all of those questions today, but it is our best hope. If we can replace private payments infrastructure, then we can replace other private choke points to human interaction as well.
My name is Gregory Zerzan. I'm a shareholder in the Pacific Northwest law firm of Jordan Ramus. I previously served as acting assistant secretary of the United States Treasury, as principal deputy solicitor of the United States Department of the Interior, and as counsel to 3 different congressional committees, including the privilege of this one. The amazing thing about blockchain is it operates as a distributed computer, meaning it can do all the things that a traditional computer can do. So, as I said in my opening statement, right now there are about 5 companies that really control the internet as we think of it, and they have their own servers, and our information is in those servers. Well, the great thing about blockchain is it distributes that power across the network. So you can think of the entire network as the computer that is doing the transactions. And in that circumstance, individuals own their own data. They control their own data, and they choose if they want to sell it to someone, if they want to pass it on to someone. All of that is under the control of the consumer, and no one else can monetize their data. So in many ways, that innovation, turning distributed computers into a giant server, is one of the most radical and potentially transformative innovations in our lifetime.
The ability to have a digital identity where you as an individual have self-sovereignty over who can access attributes of your digital identity, how they can access it, the ability to provably demonstrate something to someone, say, someone needs to know your age in order to conduct a transaction without having to disclose to them your address or other information. So the ability to have much more fine-grained, selective ways to attest through attestation methods to attest to who you are or what you do without actually having to transmit all of that sensitive personal information. The data breaches that we have today, the massive privacy violations that happen continually on centralized internet services, those are the core issues that blockchain infrastructure is being designed to try and address.
So how do these blockchains work? Here is another witness who will introduce himself, followed by Peter Van Valkenburg, who is the research director at the Coin Center.
My name is Ari Jules. I'm a faculty member at Cornell Tech and Cornell University. My main area of research is blockchain technologies. A blockchain aims to realize a kind of digital bulletin board, sometimes called a ledger. This bulletin board has some special properties. It's globally readable, meaning that everyone in the world sees all posted messages and sees them in the same order. It's also immutable. A message once posted can never be altered or removed. Such a digital bulletin board, as realized by blockchain, is conceptually simple but powerful. For example, it can support a global payment system. Suppose that the messages posted to the bulletin board specify authentic money transfers. A message might say, "I, Alice, sent $1 to Bob." Because the bulletin board is globally readable, any person in the world can determine the monetary balance of all users in the system. You just need to tally up all of the money transfers and posted messages. Now substitute Bitcoin for dollars and random numbers for names, and what I've presented is a grossly simplified but essentially accurate picture of how cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin work. You could realize this digital bulletin board using an ordinary web server, the kind you interact with every day on the internet. But if that server crashes or is hacked, the bulletin board will fail. The brilliant insight of Bitcoin's inventor was a way to avoid such problems using a blockchain maintained by an open community. To ensure fair participation and that no one individual can easily take over the system, Bitcoin relies on what's called proof of work. To help maintain the Bitcoin blockchain and earn Bitcoin through a process called mining, you need to contribute a large amount of computation to the system. You do this by solving hard mathematical puzzles. We've all had the frustrating experience of solving these little puzzles online, where you pick out images of cars or bridges to access a website. This is to ensure that you're a human being and not a bot pretending to be many people and attacking the website. Proof of work is basically a type of puzzle that prevents one computer from pretending to be many computers. It's effective, but as we've discussed, in large systems, it consumes a large amount of energy and computation. Proof of work is heavily battle tested and has valuable theoretical properties, but there are many misguided claims about it. For instance, some claim that it's critical to achieving decentralization, meaning broad participation. But Bitcoin, and in fact, many blockchain systems are in some key ways notably centralized. This is a challenge the whole industry is working on. For example, in the specific case of Bitcoin, just 4 entities called mining pools today control a majority of the mining power and thus technically can control the whole system.
Does it matter that there's an oligopoly on the mining?
It's an excellent question. So it's worth asking, once you have a lot of mining power, what harm can you do? The Bitcoin protocol is decentralized not because it distributes power, but because it checks power. What can a powerful person do to a weak person in the system? Bitcoin pits ambition against ambition, like our federalist system here in the US. And what I would say is, you can't do much. You can't change the number of Bitcoins in circulation. You wouldn't be able to make that block and have it accepted by the network. You can't reallocate or move other people's funds on the blockchain. The worst you can do is during the time when you've leveraged massive and costly resources, you can slow down the network and block transactions. It's a denial of service attack, something that all internet systems are vulnerable to.
So this is the part of the episode where the facts get a little squishy. Because as you can sense already, there are clearly some disagreements in the industry about the way forward, with the most obvious disagreements being about how best to create cryptocurrencies. And so now let's dive into that crypto wonk debate for a bit, starting first with an examination of the oldest system, the one used to create Bitcoins, the so-called proof of work system. Let's go back to Ari Jules, who's the professor from Cornell Tech.
Unfortunately, Bitcoin mining consumes a massive amount of electricity. Some credible estimates place this consumption today at roughly 0.5% of the world's total electricity supply, more, for instance, than the entire nation of Argentina.
My name is Brian Brooks, and I spent much of my career in traditional finance, culminating my service as acting U.S. controller of the currency. I also served as chief legal officer of Coinbase and currently serve as CEO of Bitfury Group. In assessing environmental concerns about Bitcoin mining, or frankly any other energy use, not all energy consumption is created equal. Would we care, for example, that an activity consumes a lot of energy if 100% of that energy came from renewable sources? Presumably not. So if Bitcoin consumes an energy mix that is roughly twice as sustainable as the U.S. electric grid as a whole, that is a more relevant fact than the mere amount of energy that it uses. And even more important are the incentives that Bitcoin creates to generate more renewable production. Bitcoin miners seek low energy costs, and the lowest cost always comes from excess capacity, which can include wind and solar energy and energy lost in the transmission and distribution process, among other things. As just one example, in 2020, in California, where I live, 1.5 million megawatt hours of solar production was curtailed, meaning wasted, because production exceeded demand. And the U.S. grid loses literally thousands of terawatts a year due to inefficient transmission. Now, because Bitcoin miners are easily able to locate near the source of production, these kinds of excess capacity sources can be turned into economic value through Bitcoin mining.
My name is John Belizaire, and I am the founder and CEO of Soluna Computing. We're a developer of green data centers for cryptocurrency mining and other batchable computing. Today, I run a company which builds data centers to absorb clean energy that would otherwise go to waste. We convert wasted, or what is known in the industry as curtailed, clean electricity into low-cost global computing. Today, the Bitcoin protocol serves as a crucible for the financial freedom of millions of people. At the heart of this protocol is a process known as proof-of-work mining. This computing-intensive process is not a waste. In fact, the energy used to perform the computing provides proof that a miner earned the right to validate a new block and add it to the chain. The entire system is designed to encourage participants to protect the network rather than attack it. So as I said earlier, it's a feature, not a bug. Most people don't know this, but up to 30% of power generated by solar and wind farms can be curtailed or wasted, which shrinks their profitability. The reason is because our grid is inflexible. It was designed on an antiquated architecture of equalizing supply and demand. Computing is a better battery. So computing is ready today to allow renewables to scale to their full potential. Unlike traditional data centers, crypto data centers don't have to run 24/7, adding nonstop load to the grid. The ability to pause processes allows us to introduce a new type of load to the grid, flexible load. Flexible load can ramp up and ramp down as needed, thereby increasing grid resilience. So we see cryptocurrency and computing's ability to provide this flexible load as a solution to one of the biggest problems in renewable energy today.
So that's the utopia. But the reality is that his company is testifying to Congress because they are different. They have a great idea that could make the energy consumption of proof of work and Bitcoin sustainable. But lots of Bitcoin mining is still powered by fossil fuels. Let's not kid ourselves. The sustainability possibilities, though, are worth knowing. This does seem to be an idea that could work at scale, especially considering that the energy-hungry Bitcoin network is getting more efficient. Here's Peter Van Valkenburg, the research director at the Coin Center.
5 transactions per second, we can do a lot more. There are multiple layers being built on top of Bitcoin today that do effectively things like batch settlement. So in just 1 or 2 transactions to the blockchain, you could have thousands of transactions. Now, if that sounds like we're reinventing the correspondent banking system and adding more centralized trust into it, it's not quite that. That's because the batch settlement can be done by a robot. Bitcoin is digitally native, so you can have smart contracts that manipulate and batch transactions together.
So that's how proof of work could be done in a sustainable way, and how the Bitcoin bros are incentivized to make it happen. But there is another way to create cryptocurrencies. Let's go back to Ari Jules of Cornell Tech, who then gets into a debate with Brian Brooks, who is the chief executive officer at Bitfury.
If my testimony achieves nothing else today, I would like to drive home one key point. Bitcoin does not equal blockchain. The tremendous promise of blockchain technology does not require Bitcoin or its energy-intensive component called proof of work. In fact, some of the most exciting developments in the blockchain industry today are happening outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem. The leading alternative, which consumes far less electricity, is called proof of stake. The number 2 cryptocurrency, Ethereum, plans to adopt proof of stake. And nearly all new blockchain systems already use it today to secure hundreds of billions of dollars in value. These systems are faster than Bitcoin and support what are called smart contracts, small programs that run on blockchains. Smart contracts are powering some of the most exciting blockchain applications, including what's called decentralized finance, or DeFi, and non-fungible tokens, or NFTs.
The problem with proof of stake versus proof of work is that proof of stake, though it is a set of very, very valuable innovations, has at its core a dependence on trust of who the stakeholders are. The original vision of Bitcoin was, this is the only trustless network, so I don't have to care who my counterparty is or who the major shareholders are. The next Bitcoin is given out based on a lottery, right? So in a proof of stake network, 51% of the ownership of that network can rewrite the ledger, can steal everybody else's money, can change the code in ways that are not favorable to the minority shareholders, just like they could in a business corporation. That's not possible in Bitcoin. One of the distinctions between the Bitcoin blockchain and proof of stake networks is it matters less in the proof of work context, the number of miners that exist, because it's not as though the miners can simply collude and choose to alter the Bitcoin blockchain the way that you could on a proof of stake blockchain. In a proof of work system, you're receiving Bitcoin rewards randomly, right? Because there's a lottery going on. And I think this is one of the most confusing and perhaps most misunderstood aspects of Bitcoin. What goes on is not that there is a correct answer about validating all of the transactions on the blockchain and some miner is figuring out the correct answer. What happens is there's a puzzle that has no correlation at all to the underlying transactions, and whoever gets the right answer first is part of a lottery ticket winner who gets that reward. That's how it's different. So I can't collude with Riot and Marathon and the other biggest miners and decide to alter the blockchain. I could do that, however, on a proof-of-stake network, just like I could in corporate America. I could be a corporate raider and round up a majority of the shares and take over the company and oppress the minority shareholders. That's why proof of work, one of the reasons why proof of work is a good thing, because it prevents that.
Any blockchain that becomes centralized, whether it's proof of work or proof of stake system, poses a threat to the security of the system in that the miners can in principle take over the system. Today, the Bitcoin blockchain can in principle be controlled by a set of 4 entities. They're known as mining pools. If they collaborate, they can in principle spend the same coins twice or cause the network to simply stop processing transactions. So the idea that proof of stake protects against this problem is simply not true. And in fact, there have been that proof of work protects against this problem is simply not true. There have been proof of work systems. Ethereum Classic is one example. Bitcoin Gold, a Bitcoin spinoff, is another, that have been successfully attacked by people who rented hash power and took over the network by devoting more resources to the network than the other miners there. So again, proof of work does not provide definitive or inherent protection against centralization, and we've seen that in practice. Proof of stake, as I said, does raise some concerns about the rich getting richer, but that's not really a function of the use of proof of stake. But this too is a systemic problem. A study recently by faculty at MIT in the London School of Economics showed, for instance, that 0.01% of the wallets in Bitcoin control 27% of the Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin isn't an egalitarian system.
To be honest, I don't know what to make of any of that, except that there's clearly an experiment going on. And I guess time will tell, since Bitcoin is going to be proof of work and Ethereum is transitioning to proof of stake. You know, I guess we're just going to see which one proves to be the most secure over time. The only thing that seems clear is that all of these people are excited about the potential for blockchains to really limit the power of corporate middlemen in finance, information, contracting. And I kept thinking while watching all of these hearings that big business in so many sectors have huge financial incentives to demonize and kill the entire blockchain experiment. Removing banking middlemen obviously reduces the banker's ability to collect all kinds of middleman fees. Data decentralization reduces the tech company's ability to collect and sell our information to advertising companies, which is the main source of their billions. Smart contracts could make housing brokers, corporate lawyers, all kinds of corporate middlemen obsolete. Blockchain is a major threat to the titans of industry, the masters of the shareholder class, who have inserted themselves as profit-seeking leeches all over our corporate economy. Which brings me to the testimony of Nouriel Roubini. Now, he's going to introduce himself, but he is a very famous economist who's currently a professor of economics at New York University. But he became famous in the years before the financial crash for predicting that Wall Street fuckery was going to crash the global economy. Back then, he was nicknamed Dr. Doom until he was proven right. And so this dude really does understand the nuances of the World Trade System, which is the nickname I've given for the actual institutions that govern the so-called global market economy, which are mainly the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Well, Nouriel Roubini has worked at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. He's also worked for our central bank, the Federal Reserve, and of course, he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a think tank that brands itself as just a place where the rich and powerful get together and get pensive. But in practice, its members have been key figures in the ongoing project to design a global economic system that serves the shareholder class. And so basically, Nouriel Roubini is from precisely the group of people, like the corporate elite, the heads of the World Trade System, that the blockchain technology promises to reduce the power of. And so here he is, in 2018, testifying to Congress.
My name is Nouriel Roubini. I'm a professor of economics at New York University. I'm an expert of the global economy, of asset and credit bubbles, and of financial crises. The crypto ideological utopia is a libertarian dream of full decentralization of all human transactions. No governments, no central banks, no corporation, no banks, no trusted institutions. It's totally utter nonsense. Crypto is the mother or father of all scams and bubbles, a bubble that has finally gone bust this year. Blockchain is the most overhyped technology ever, and is no better than a glorified database. No organization, government, corporation, or bank would ever want to put on a public, permissionless, distributed, trustless ledger all of its transactions with customers and suppliers. It doesn't make sense, and it's not going to happen. So blockchain is a lot of hype and almost no reality, as an expert senior analyst recently concluded. There is a revolution in financial services, but it has nothing to do with blockchain or crypto. It is called fintech, and is based on a combination of AI, big data, and Internet of Things. And it's already being used daily by billions of people for billions of financial transactions. There is no blockchain in fintech.
The World Trade System is the best and only system, peasants. Yo, blockchain. Nothing to see there. Man, it's so fascinating watching his testimony in tandem with the nuanced and thoughtful testimony from the people who actually understand and want the blockchain technology to develop. This guy was just spitting hate balls. And since the FTX exchange went bankrupt, there's been a lot of demonization of cryptocurrencies. And people in media branding all of the cryptocurrencies as nothing but scams. But that just seems like a line of branding that would be helpful if your goal, as a corporate titan who benefits from a system that inserts corporations as profit-sucking middlemen in so many industries, branding all cryptocurrencies as scams as part of an effort to kill the blockchain technology they're built on, that makes sense to me. And I know that after seeing all of this testimony, I'm going to be taking a beat to consider who is calling cryptocurrency and therefore blockchain technology a scam before I actually listen to them. Because I see now the existential threat that blockchain really is. It's much bigger than just threatening some profit sources of bankers. There's big data and healthcare and lawyers and credit card companies and insurance companies. So many industries stand to lose money if we can cut them out of our interactions with each other. That said, though, not all power centers in the world are trying to stop the progression of blockchain technology. Some, which the world traders and friends can't control, are actually embracing it. Here's Dr. Rebecca Nelson again of the Congressional Research Service.
Some central banks are exploring the creation of their own cryptocurrencies. Some countries plan to develop cryptocurrencies as a second legal tender. For example, the Marshall Islands is planning to create a cryptocurrency called the Sovereign to raise government revenue. Venezuela launched the Petro, a cryptocurrency backed by oil, as a way to raise money and evade sanctions. Iran and Russia are also reportedly considering cryptocurrencies, at least in part, to avoid sanctions. Other governments are considering making digital versions of their existing fiat currencies directly available to individuals. For example, Sweden's e-krona project strives to reduce its reliance on private payment processing companies. The central banks of most major developed countries are refraining from such initiatives at this time.
Which isn't surprising. Most central banks are a part of and in service to the World Trade System right now. And so it makes sense that only outliers in countries that are actively trying to build a competing global economic system would be interested in a technology that can potentially reduce the power of the corporations at the heart of the World Trade System. But just because people like Nouriel Roubini and other servants to the corporate class like him are clearly biased against and lobbying our actual Congress against cryptocurrencies and blockchain, that doesn't make all of their concerns unfounded, even if they are self-serving. And so in this batch of clips, which are all from the same 2018 hearing, you're going to hear first from Nouriel Roubini, and then you'll hear from Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who's going to get some answers from Peter von Valkenburg of the Coin Center. And in these clips, they're going to discuss ICOs, which stands for Initial Coin Offerings, which are sales of new cryptocurrencies.
If I lose my credit card or somebody steals my bank account, I call and it's blocked. I have deposit insurance. I have lender last resort support of the financial system. Yes, I pay a fee. If somebody is hacking your crypto wealth, it's gone forever. no deposit insurance, no lender of last resort, no solution on the immutable hacking of your wealth.
According to reports, more than $1.1 billion of cryptocurrency was stolen in the first half of 2018. Why is cryptocurrency so easy to steal? And what should we be thinking about to secure it?
So those thefts were primarily with regard to newer cryptocurrencies who had experienced massive price increases and were being secured by exchanges or businesses, usually overseas, who didn't scale their security in line with the value that was rising. That was a speculative bubble. I will not disagree with Dr. Rubini at all on that account. It was irrational, and it was triggered by this ICO market, which is largely fraud or unregistered securities issuance, which is, of course, not permitted.
A study came out earlier this year that said that 80% of ICOs in 2017 were scams. SEC Chairman Jay Clayton has suggested the right approach to uncovering the scams and protecting investors is to regulate ICOs as security offerings. And I just want to ask if you agree with that approach. I know we're over time, but if I could just permit the witness to answer.
I do agree with that approach. As I said, the majority of ICOs have either been unregistered securities issuance or scams, as Chairman Clayton has said. The SEC has made very careful and deliberate policy here. I think they've done an excellent job. They released a report helping people understand these things. They created a website helping them understand them in a visual, physical way. And they've brought targeted enforcement actions that I think have started to chill these markets and make them more rational. That said, I think you can do a token sale and comply with securities laws as you should. And we're seeing the emergence of companies doing that, selling only to accredited investors, or, and I think this will happen in the near future, even doing public registration and offering tokens to shareholders.
Now, this is one area where I really struggle to feel bad for people who get scammed. Because buying a cryptocurrency that someone just invented out of nowhere, of course that's a scam. And fun fact, by the way, remember Madison Cawthorn? Remember that member of Congress that we discussed way too many times on We're Not Wrong, who got in trouble for drunk driving and who tried to help Trump stay president and who pulled his fine ass out of his wheelchair to fake his friend's face on camera? Well, that member of Congress just got fined $14,000 by the Ethics Committee for promoting a Let's Go Brandon cryptocurrency, which was a scammy, new, out-of-nowhere cryptocurrency that he got to buy at cheaper rates than the rest of the public. And his conflict of interest was so obvious that he couldn't even get away with it in Congress. But it's not just hot, yet really stupid members of Congress who are crypto criminals. There are others, and cryptocurrencies do have the reputation of being beloved by criminals. Well, here's what the experts told Congress about that, starting with Dr. Doom, and then we'll get answers from Peter Van Valkenburg of the Coin Center, who, by the way, was sitting right next to Nouriel Roubini and stared right at him while Roubini faced forward. It was pretty tense. I gotta tell you, I loved it.
Cryptocurrencies and blockchain have been used by criminals, by terrorists, by human traffickers, by tax evaders, just to engage in a variety of criminal activities. It's correct that in principle, law enforcement authorities can go after this stuff. You know, the Silk Road was using Bitcoin for lots of transactions. They cracked it and then they got arrested and prosecuted. But of course, a system that in principle is supposed to be anonymous, and not just anonymous at the domestic level, but globally, implies significant risk to enforcement.
If you're just transacting on the blockchain, even using an account that you originally created in an overseas authority that didn't collect information, that it is, as Dr. Rubini says, anonymous. It's not anonymous at all. And I've spoken with several law enforcement officials and investigators who, as I said, enjoy doing their blockchain investigations because they can track every transaction with perfect fidelity on the blockchain. Very different than the international correspondent banking system where you have shell accounts and bad records and records all over at different institutions. Now, with Bitcoin, I think it's actually a positive story, especially here in the U.S. As I said, FinCEN, our financial surveillance regulator, was fast out of the gate globally, first out of the gate, to say that Cryptocurrency exchanges need to know their customers and need to do suspicious activity reporting. So when you're getting onto the Bitcoin network by buying Bitcoins on an exchange, your name's going to be taken down if you're doing it at a U.S. exchange. Now, what about transactions within the Bitcoin network that aren't in an exchange? Well, they are public on the public ledger that I've been talking about. And we have phenomenal law enforcement in this country that I've had the pleasure of meeting who have become extremely adept at analyzing that big data and finding and de-anonymizing or identifying a Bitcoin address as being belonging to somebody involved in moving the proceeds of crime. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer network of persons running software around the world, and that software is developed itself by people around the world. It's a voluntary system, if you will. So there's no corporate form to set and guarantee policies across all users. That said, there are several intermediaries who are building their businesses on top of Bitcoin, just as you saw several companies build their businesses on top of the shared and open internet back in the 90s. And those businesses, especially those that are based and regulated here in the U.S., do have those policies for identifying and policing illicit use of the network, and they do file suspicious activity reports, and they do register with FinCEN, which is our financial surveillance authority.
And you already know this. Other experts testified that cryptocurrencies are not actually big players in the global drug trade or sanctions evasion game, which you heard yourself during the Congressional Dish episode about how countries get around our sanctions, which, by the way, was by using the traditional financial system, especially inside the U.S. But in case you haven't heard that episode, which I do recommend you listen to, it's pretty fascinating. But in case you haven't heard it, here are the relevant clips from that. First, you're going to hear from Eric Lorber, who is the former senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence at the Department of the Treasury. Then you'll hear from Representative Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, who's questioning Jesse Spiro, who is the Global Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Chainalysis. And then last, you'll hear from Daniel Glazer, who's the former Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes at the U.S. Department of the Treasury.
The number of transactions which are illicit that use Bitcoin or blockchain technology is actually fairly low percentage-wise. It's, I believe, below 1% or somewhere around there. So it's fairly small.
Blockchain offer you an advantage in obfuscating your identity over a different type of currency?
No, I would actually posit the complete opposite. If they're engaged in illicit activity that can be seen in relation to illicit crypto activity, it is going to be very difficult for them to do anything within the ecosystem.
I think it's important to remember that if you want to be able to use a cryptocurrency in the real economy to any scale, it at some point does need to be converted into actual fiat currency, into dollars. That's the place where the Treasury Department does regulate cryptocurrencies.
Because of the connectivity with cryptocurrency, when a wallet is put on that designation list, any associated activity, or within a designation, any associated activity and legacy activity in relation to that look back can also be
visible. Yeah.
So cryptocurrencies are not the preferred payment method for criminals and terrorists, because there's a digital paper trail on cryptocurrencies that everyone in the world can see, which makes it really hard to cash out in the real world where regulations do exist that provide the government with information. And so finally, let's take a look at the current state of cryptocurrency regulations and the experts' advice to Congress, starting with Rebecca Nelson of the Congressional Research Service, and then Peter Van Valkenburg of the Coin Center, followed by Gregory Zerzan, who is the former acting assistant secretary of the United States Treasury and former congressional committee lawyer. And we're going to wrap it up with Jeremy Allaire, who testified on behalf of the Blockchain Foundation.
Cryptocurrencies are international in nature, but they are regulated by governments at the national level. There are more than 190 countries in the world, and they are taking different approaches to the regulatory issues presented by cryptocurrencies. For example, cryptocurrency regulations have focused on permitted uses, consumer protections, securities regulations, licensing and reporting requirements, anti-money laundering regulations, and tax treatment. Broadly speaking, government approaches fall across the spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, some countries, such as Malta, Singapore, and Switzerland, are striving to become cryptocurrency hubs. They view cryptocurrencies as a potential source of growth, and they actively attract cryptocurrencies with favorable regulation and tax regimes. At the other end of the spectrum, some countries, including China, India, Egypt, and Taiwan, have banned or strongly restricted cryptocurrencies. Their concerns focus on government control of the financial sector, financial stability, and consumer protections. In the middle of the spectrum, some governments are allowing the development of cryptocurrencies while developing regulations to minimize risks. Most major developed economies, including the United States and the United Kingdom, have adopted this approach. Some of the cryptocurrency hubs are actually using regulation as a way to attract cryptocurrencies to their borders. It's not a...
So increased regulation.
Well, not necessarily increased regulation, but perhaps clarity over regulation, that by giving regulatory certainty to consumers and businesses in the cryptocurrency market, they're getting out in front on that and attracting cryptocurrencies to their jurisdictions.
Exchanges in the U.S. are regulated by the federal government for anti-money laundering purposes. So FinCEN was one of the first out of the gate. America led here, and the rest of the world needs to catch up. FinCEN said, exchanges are money services businesses. We need KYC. We need suspicious activity reporting. From a consumer protection standpoint, though, they're regulated by the states. You have to get a money transmission license in every state where you have customers, assuming the state regulator for money transmission licensing has opined on the question of whether cryptocurrency exchanges fit their definition of money transmission or don't. That regime is not entirely rational. These are natively global payments networks, and you're going state by state to get licenses from the proper authorities. And you're going to have 53 or so criminal background checks. The next one is not going to make you more or less secure for your customers. Also, money transmission licensing regimes, they look for custody risk, which is important to safeguard against, but they don't deal in other investor protection concerns like manipulation and transparency in markets. I think it's about time that we had a serious policy conversation in this country about whether that state-by-state approach is reasonable and whether it's the best way to protect consumers. Federal preemption and an alternative federal license for these companies, perhaps one that also polices for market manipulation and supervises for that, would be, I think, a wise choice that would make America a leader and protect our consumers.
Bitcoin is one cryptocurrency, but not all cryptocurrencies are meant to be a cash substitute. Indeed, cryptocurrency is simply the oil that lubricates the blockchain. It is an internal economic incentive for the computing power that the blockchain represents. And so a lot of the conversation about regulation of cryptocurrency has been among financial regulators. And I submit that that is not necessarily appropriate. Cryptocurrency is code. Its purpose is to make blockchains run efficiently. And so the idea that we might strangle the innovation of the blockchain by imposing inappropriate regulation on it is very real. And I believe there's a way to overcome that regulatory uncertainty, primarily by understanding that laws such as the Federal Trade Commission Act, which protect consumers against unfair and deceptive acts and practices, apply to transactions in code like cryptocurrency. And I would suggest that while there are some applications of the blockchain that are financial products, that is not by any means necessarily the case with all cryptocurrencies and transactions that occur on the blockchain.
Many of these digital assets do not easily fit classifications that we've had in our financial system. We'd like to say, oh, this is like a currency, or this is like a commodity that you'd use or utilize in some way, or this has some feature that maybe makes it look like an investment contract. Many digital assets have features of all three. It's what makes digital assets, I think, very innovative, is that you can construct a asset that simultaneously incentivizes capital, incentivizes customer behavior, provides value in terms of access to goods or services and payments. And that's a breakthrough in how we can develop corporate forms. It's a breakthrough in how we can incentivize and develop businesses and technologies. Unfortunately, in the United States, the guidance that the SEC has given is extremely, let's just say, narrow in terms of what they would deem to not be a security. The vast majority of digital assets, if they were in fact treated as securities, as the Howey test application and the most recent staff guidance provides, effectively would mean that those are not accessible to U.S. persons because the utility value of the asset would not be possible to function if it's treated as a security. So there's a fundamental mismatch between the regulatory structure and guidance that we have here and the nature of these digital assets. And so markets around the world are adopting these, and not just Bermuda, but Singapore, Switzerland, even jurisdictions like France introducing tailor-purposed definitions of digital assets so that issuers can feel comfortable with their obligations. There's investor protections associated with those and security and the like, but which don't try and jam these into the respective classifications we have today.
So the reason I wanted to produce this episode today is because there is currently a lot of calls for regulation of cryptocurrencies since FTX, which was a large cryptocurrency exchange, went bankrupt. FTX is essentially a website where people were buying and selling and holding cryptocurrencies. But the people who owned that exchange took the money people gave them for cryptocurrencies, gambled with it, lost the money, and then couldn't pay their customers what they owed them. Which might sound a lot like what the big banks did during the W. Bush years, because it's exactly what the big banks did during the W. Bush years. And we'll get into all of that in the next episode. In that episode, I'll be highlighting for you the recent hearings on the FTX bankruptcy, including one with the chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, who's been lobbying Congress for the power to be the main cryptocurrency regulator, and who went to Congress last week to discuss a Senate bill that is already written that would do just that, empower him. But it's a bill that was written in consultation with Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the CEO of FTX, the exchange that just went bankrupt after gambling with customer funds. And I don't want to get any more into the details yet, but let me just tell you that the story is fucking nuts. And there's another hearing scheduled for December 13th, which is after this recording, that I want to watch for you before I give you all the gossip that I can gather from Congress and the press about all of this FTX drama and how it is or isn't having an effect on Congress's plans for regulating this complicated market. But until then, please consider supporting this show. We have no executive producers to announce on this episode, and I'm experiencing a firing wave right now, which is never fun, but it's a bit harsher when I'm working through the holidays in order to get these crypto/FTX episodes done, and in order to create a mashup episode for you, highlighting all 10 of the January 6th committee hearings, just in time for the 2-year anniversary of that crazy day. And yes, I know I'm like, I'm a martyr, I'm working through the holidays, but honestly, I'm excited to produce that one. I am going to feast on the drama for Christmas this year. But then after that, I am expecting when I get back to work, which I never actually stopped working, I'm going to get back to work in January on what is likely to be law by then, the NDAA, which is the annual war authorization. I'm expecting that to land with a big thud on my desk because the House just released their version and it is 4,408 pages long. And so it's tough to get motivated to tackle that kind of workload when simultaneously watching my income level go down. And so if you want to help me get through this, please donate whatever you think is fair using whatever payment method works for you. We accept paper checks and Zells and Venmos, Cash App payments. We accept cryptocurrencies. And we also have a Patreon, which does have inconsistently released bonus episodes for people who actually like me and want to know me a bit better. And so along that line, I do have a new bonus episode up from a few hours after I recently ran the San Antonio Rock and Roll Half Marathon with my husband, Joe, and one of my besties, Alexis Claypool Glazer, who you know and love from the tax cut episode and the episode from 2020 that was about the Postal Service back when there was an incorrect rumor going around that the Postmaster General was purposefully slowing down the mail to help Trump. I was camping with Alexis and constantly chattering about the Postal Service. And so we just recorded the episode out at our campsite and it was a great one. You guys loved it. And that's Alexis. That's the person who flew out to San Antonio with us. And Joe and I, well, Joe ran the half marathon. I jogged the half marathon and Alexis walked the half marathon. So people of all skill levels can do these things. And if you've never thought of running a half marathon before or walking a half marathon before, maybe that's a good episode to listen to because I think we will convince you that it is so much fun, regardless of how in shape you are, because Alexis didn't train for 1 second for this, and she had the best time. So in this bonus episode, the three of us compare our race stories, since we all did it separately at our different speeds. And then, after we stopped talking about the marathon, Alexis and I spun off into planning future adventures and reviewing our old disaster meetup spots and just being silly. I just remember really enjoying our long chat, as I always do with Joe and Alexis, and I think you'll enjoy it too. So yeah, please support the show, and thanks as always if you already do. I'm fairly certain that I'd still be waiting tables without you. Either that or maybe working for Southwest Airlines, because they seem to be such a happy bunch, and I sure would like to fly for free. But Congressional Dish is my career now, thanks to you. So thank you, and I will talk to you next on Christmas Day. Enjoy all the holiday lights. Talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.